Hello guys, welcome to my channel. In the last part, we have written all these types we require for the application. Now we are going to code all the game logic required and get this app up and running. So let's get started. Now let's quickly create the game. I'm going to create a new file called game.tsx and I'm going to import our types. So we need game type from types game type like that. And a game is going to be an object, but that object is going to be of type game type. So like that. And let's export this from this file like that. Now in this object we are going to define every node indexed by their ID. So if I put first node, I want first node to be an object which will have, as you can see, I'm getting autocomplete title. So I want title to be what is the name, and then I will get another autocomplete for options and default next node. So I can put options here, which is going to be an array as we have defined it in the types. And there are going to be 4 options, which are actually objects as we defined. So let's define an object and let's press Ctrl space to get autocomplete. Option also has a title. So option 1 like that. Another required parameters are next node ID. So actually I want this to be an optional parameter. Let's go to game type and make this as an optional parameter like that. As you can see, now it's not matter to me. And we want default next node to also be an optional parameter like that. So now as you can see, we have a simple first node defined. I can define the second node as well like that, and some title and have some options. I have to define this because they are required parameters. So like title, option 1, that. Now because we had defined our key to be numeric, we can't use string as our key. Like we can't have a string key like this. This is not allowed by TypeScript because we have defined our game to have key as a number. So this is how TypeScript helps us. I'm going to remove this like that. This is a simple way we can define our game. The default next node would redirect us to next node, whatever node you define it to go, and it would take us to the next node regardless any option is cleared. But if you want different options to take you to different nodes, then we can define it in the specific option like next node ID like this and set it to 2 maybe like that. So we'll play with this a bit later. Now let's code the game logic itself. I actually have a game object already built, so I'm going to copy that itself like that. As you can see, we have some errors popping up here. So what is happening here is we have defined this to our next state to be a record of item types as boolean. What record inbuilt type is doing here is it wants us to make an object which has all the key types. So it wants me to put gun as a key and flashlight as a key. So what we can do here is we can use another inbuilt type called partial, and which would take in this object. What partial does is that it converts all the required parameters to optional parameters. Now as you can see, our errors have gone. Now new state can be an object which can have flashlight or cannot have flashlight. It is optional. As you can see, we have a question mark here. Now let's start coding our game logic. I'm going to import a useState hook as we're going to manage all our state in this component itself. If you're not familiar with the useState hook, I've made a 8 minutes video which shows you everything you need to know about the useState hook and how to also use it with TypeScript. So I'll leave the link in the I button above. Now I'm going to have a variable called node ID and a function called set node ID. This will keep track of the current node which is displayed on a page, and the initial value is going to be the first node. Now let's keep track of the specific node we want to render. So I'm going to import a game itself, from which we are going to get the node game like that. Then let's declare a variable called node, which is going to be of game.node ID like that. This way we pull up our node. Now question can be directly taken from the node itself. So you can do like this node.title that. So our first question would be displayed now on the screen. And now we want to render all the options. To do that, I'm going to loop through all the options we have for a specific node. So we have node.map. I'm going to write an arrow function in which the first parameter is going to be the option and the second parameter is going to be the index. It should be node.options.map because options is an array. And I'm going to return every single button. So like this button. The value in the button is going to be option.title like that. We are going to have a key so that React would be able to render this more efficiently like this. And let's add the onClick event handler for our buttons. So onClick, I want to call an arrow function, which is going to call another function which is going to be on option click. We'll define it after this, and we're going to pass in the index. We're sending in the index of the option in the options array. Now let's define the function. On option click. This is going to take the index. I'm going to write idx, which is going to be of type number. Now let's get that option. So I'm going to define const this option will be node.options array and the specific index we want. Now we want to redirect to the next node. So we're going to check if the default node is set. If the default next node is set, so we're going to check it by node.default next node. If it is set, then all options would lead to this default next node. So we're going to set node ID, which we have defined here in the useState, to node.default next ID. But if that is not set, we are going to look at the individual next node we have set for each option. So if this option dot next node ID is set, then I want to redirect to that node ID, next node ID like that. Now if we look at our application, each option will lead to next node whichever we have defined in the game like that. Now let's implement the inventory itself. Now we are going to use the useState hook to define the inventory. So like const inventory and set inventory and useState. Now we can define a generic for this as well. I highly recommend watching that video for more details on the useState hook. So the inventory is going to be of type record. It is going to be of object. It is going to be an object which has key as item type. We have to import the item type first. let's do that. Import item types from types items type, like that. And we want this record to be item type and boolean. We are not going to use partial here because we want to define every game object. So the initial state is going to be flashlight, it's going to be false, and gun is also going to be false. Initially the player wouldn't have all these items. Now we want to set the inventory when an option is clicked. If you remember, we had set a new state key in our every option. So when an option is clicked, we want to set the new state if it is defined. So we want to do it in the onClick option function. So we want to set the inventory to an object with the old inventory and the new state we are going to get from this option. So we're going to spread it, this option dot new state. Like that. So the new state we had defined in the game would be set on every option clicked. Now we have inventory set up, but we have to display it on our screen as well. So I'm going to define a function called render inventory. It is going to be an arrow function, like that. Now let's define a variable called list, which is going to be an empty string. And I'm going to loop through the inventory array. So I'm going to use the for loop. Now to get the key, we have to do a typecast here. So I'm going to define, now if you look at the key, it is of type string, but we have to typecast so that we can use it with the inventory object itself. The way to do that is we are going to use key as keyword, as the TypeScript keyword, which converts one type to another. That's what we call typecasting. So I want to change this to a key of type of inventory. If you hover over this is just of type string, but this is of type item type. This is what we need. So now if inventory dot item type, inventory dot k is true, as we are mapping this to a boolean, if we want this to be true, if this is true, then we are going to append it to the list of items in the inventory. And I'm going to use a template literal. And I'm going to put a comma here. And then I'm going to return the list, the string itself, to be rendered, like that. I have to call this function in front of inventory, like that, render inventory. Now let's look at our application. Now if I pick up a gun, the gun is added to our inventory. Now if you remember, for each option we have a required array which stores all the items required for before that option is allowed to be clicked. For example, to use this option, to use the gun, we need gun in the inventory. So let's implement that functionality. We are going to disable a button by setting the class name as disabled. Now let's write a function which determines when the class name should be set to disable. So I'm going to define an arrow function. Check is disabled. This function is going to take in the option which is of type option, We have to import this type from our types. Let's import it. Import option from types game type, like that. And in here we are going to define a flag. Let's call it is disabled, and initially it is set to false. Now if we have required array set for this option, like that, then we want to set the disabled. First we have to check if all the required items are present in the inventory. To do that, we are going to do option dot required dot for each. We are going to loop through the array with the item, and I'm going to check if inventory, and this should not be null, then this is null. I'm going to set is disabled to true. Like if inventory doesn't contain that item, or if it is set to false, then I'm going to set I'm going to disable that button. And then we return if is disabled is true. I want to return a string disabled, or else I'm just going to return an empty string. Now we're going to call this function in a very peculiar location. We're going to call it in class name. Check is disabled, and let's pass in the option, like that. Now let's check our application. Now if I don't pick up anything, I shout for help, you can see that this option requires the gun, but I don't have the gun in the inventory, so I can't use it. Our application is complete. This is all for this video. I hope you like this video. Hit like if you like the video. Subscribe for more such content. We are also going to deploy this application to GitHub pages in the fourth part of this series. I also want to plug in my React Redux series, where I have shown how to use React Redux along with TypeScript in full detail. You can check that out in the description and in the I button above. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.